was put on trial, and the crowd, Pontius Pilate gave the crowd a choice between Barabbas and Jesus, and they chose Barabbas. And they chose to crucify Jesus. You guys remember that?
Yeah.
Those of you who were here, I mean, not all of you were here. You guys remember that, right? Okay, so we're going to continue in that kind of vein. So I want you guys to turn with me. Mark chapter 15, verse 16. That's going to be page 564. Those of you who brought the page. Breathe. All right. You all there? All right. So I'm going to kind of railroad through this. This kind of serves our introduction, kind of set the scene a little bit. So it's going to say, starting in verse 16, the soldiers led Jesus away into the palace, that is the praetorium, that's just the building. And they called together the whole company of soldiers. They put a purple robe on him, that's Jesus, then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on him, and they began to call out to him, "Hail, King of the Jews." Now I want you guys to notice a few things that are in here. Okay, so when we think of thorns, we think of kind of rosebush thorns, right? Kind of small ones, right? These are straight out of Palestine thorns. These are 2-3 inches long. They are sharp. And they made a whole kind of crown thing with them, and they stuck them on Jesus' head. Okay? That doesn't usually feel good. And then they're saying, "Hail, King of the Jews." So they're mocking him, right? Because Jesus has been called King of the Jews a couple times in the past. People have worshipped him, oh, he's the King of the Jews. So they're mocking him, right? Saying, "Hail, King of the Jews." You know, ha ha, he's the King of the Jews. And so, then I'm going to railroad through this. We're not going to read all of it. So then eventually they lead him out to crucify him. Now back when you get crucified, they make you carry your own cross to where you're going to get crucified. It's a lot of wood. It's pretty heavy. And just before this, Jesus had been spit on. He had the crown of thorns, I'm sure. He had been clubbed in the head, it says, so just beaten, right? And they had this whip that had 9 ends on it, and in each end there was a piece of glass or an animal tooth or something sharp. You just smack them with it. And they're just going after him. They're just going crazy. And then they're going to make him carry his cross. It's not like, Jesus just carries his cross. Like he was like savagely beaten before he carried his cross. And then down here, a certain man from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing him on his way by the country, and they forced him to carry the cross. You guys want to know why that is? Because Jesus physically could not do it. That's how bad he was beaten. They had to make someone else carry his cross to the hill. Okay, so it goes. They're crucifying 2 robbers with him. They're mocking him the whole time, yelling at him, right? Just all kinds of nasty things. The chief priests are mocking him. The soldiers are mocking him. Right? Just relentless. That kind of thing. And then eventually, Jesus dies from this time on the cross and his horrible wounds. Right? Now this isn't, we understand, Jesus died on the cross. But I mean, Jesus was really dead. Like, he had gotten beaten really bad, and getting hung on the cross, being crucified, that's what it means. You get killed by being hung on the cross. That is, to date, one of the most horrific methods of killing someone that has ever been imagined. Even still today. This is back a couple thousand years ago. So Jesus is really, really dead. And this was hard for not only Jesus, because he's taken it, but the disciples, the people who had been with him this whole time. And his mother was there. She watched it all happen, his mom. Right? So then, Jesus is taken down from the cross and is buried, because he's obviously dead. And they buried him in a tomb wrapped in linen cloth. Okay, so they kind of wrapped him up, almost like a mummy, but not quite. They put it in this tomb. Right? Now, this is kind of what sets up the scene for what's going to happen here. Now, this is going to be kind of rapid fire, a lot of events. if you guys have any questions about, what's happening, who's this person, what does this mean, just seriously, word it out. Because this is important. You guys need to grasp this. You guys need to grasp the events in this kind of story right here, okay? Does that sound good? Can you do that? Yeah. So, now we're going to start right at the beginning of chapter 16. That's still going to be on page 564. It says, when the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go to anoint Jesus' body. So let's kind of put together our little squad here. We've got Mary, who is the mother of Jesus, Jesus' mom, and she also gave birth to James, one of the disciples. Okay? One of the other sons. We have Mary Magdalene. This is another Mary, who was the sister of the mother of Jesus. Right? So Jesus. And then we've got Salome. Okay, this is the mother of, there were two James in the disciples. So the other James and the mother of John. You guys have heard all these names before, right? James, John, they're the disciples. Okay, so we have Mary Magdalene, Salome. Okay, so that's going to be verse 1. And in verse 2 it says, very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb. So we have our three women, and they're going to the tomb of Jesus to put spices in there and pay their respects. Okay. Then in verse 3, it says, and they asked each other, who will roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb? Now, with tombs back then, they had big old stones rolled across the front of them, giant rocks. See, I mean, you can't just go in and do whatever you know. They're buried there. That's kind of where this is cave in the rock with a giant stone in front of it, and it's sealed up. And it's not like this was easy to move. You had to get 5, 6, 7 soldiers to heave for like a couple minutes just to roll it away a little bit so you could go in if you had to put someone in there or take some nap, that kind of thing. So they're wondering, okay, we want to pay our respects to Jesus, but who's going to roll away the stone for us? They're kind of worried. Now, something interesting I want you guys to grasp. We're going to skip back just a tad here. You guys notice I was kind of sequencing Jesus' death, right? You notice how all this nastiness happened to him, all this bad stuff. Mercilessly mocked and beaten, but he did not resist. He didn't fight it. That'd be tough, huh? So, this is what the two Marys and Salome had on their mind. Okay, Jesus just went through this horrific death, and he didn't struggle. So that's really hard for them. Okay? So they're going to the tomb, and then in verse 4, it says, but when they looked up, they saw the stone, which was very large. They had made note of that there, because it was very large. Had been rolled away. Okay. So we have our stone in front of the tomb, and the tomb is open. Cool. Someone already kind of did that. And in verse 5, as they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. Interesting. Verse 6, don't be alarmed, he said. You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. What? Think back a little bit. This horrific, awful death that you don't take, you don't survive what happened to Jesus. That doesn't happen. Like, he's really dead, like I said earlier. Fast forward a couple days, Mary, and Salome go to the tomb. And this man here, who was actually an angel, he is risen. He is not here. Imagine what must have been going through their heads. They saw what happened to Jesus. They saw it with their eyeballs. And now someone is going to tell them that he is alive. He's actually alive. Are you kidding me right now? That's ridiculous. That's what I would tell, honestly.
Agree.
Right? And it says, see the place where they laid him. Look, he's not there. In verse 7, but go, tell his disciples and Peter. I like to always think of Peter, how I'm styling a little bit, changing my thing. Go tell specifically. Right? Go tell his disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. Here's the funny part. Jesus told everyone this was exactly what's going to happen. Right? Jesus, when he was alive the first time, he's alive now, but when he was alive the first time, he told the disciples about how all this was going to go down. He predicted, I'm going to be crucified. It's going to be nasty. It's going to be hard. I'm going to be dead for 3 days, and I'm going to rise again. That's how it's going to happen. Jesus called it, basically.
Didn't you predict that like 3 times or something like that?
Several times, yes. And I don't think it quite ever soaked into the disciples' minds, the whole coming back to life part. You know, they kind of listened like, oh, okay, yeah. But they didn't really get it, obviously. There you will see him just as he told you. Verse 8, trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. So they were freaked out. You guys get that?
Yeah.
This was something, even though Jesus had called it so many times, the impact of Jesus rising from the grave just rocked their world. It shook them to their core, right? Now, on the surface, this is obviously exciting news. Jesus is actually alive. Yes! Right? But the fact that, like I said earlier, the 3 women saw what happened. They saw it all. And then they were told he's alive. And it looked like that might actually be the case. Imagine what's going through their heads, honestly. So we'll continue on in verse 9. All right, now that we have this kind of setup, who wants to read verse 9 through 11?
When Jesus rose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, out of whom he had driven 7 demons. She went and told those who had been with him and who were mourning and weeping. When they heard that Jesus was alive and that she had seen him, they did not believe it.
Okay, so we got Mary Magdalene, who's referenced earlier. And Jesus appears to her. Mary Magdalene's chilling, doing her thing. Jesus, and he's there. Right? I like that there's maybe some sort of conversation that happens, something, but there's an interaction. Mary Magdalene interacts with the living Jesus. How crazy is that? And so, apparently she had gotten over her initial kind of fear of like, oh my gosh, Jesus is actually alive. And she was so excited she went to tell everyone, right? That's what it says in verse 10. And then verse 11 says, when they heard that Jesus was alive and that she had seen him, they did not believe. So this is kind of common. People going, yeah, right, Jesus is actually alive. Right? Because it's so unbelievable to think of that. To think that Jesus is actually alive after what he went through. Okay, who's got verse 12 through 13? Becca, go.
After Jesus appeared in a different form to the 2 of them while they were walking into the country, these returned and reported to the rest, but they did not believe them either.
Okay, so it talks about the 2 of them. So we got 2 more people that Jesus appears to. Jesus is alive and people interact with them. So from the other Gospels we can tell one of these guys is named Cleopas. Okay, he was an apostle of Jesus. So we got Cleopas and his friend. And they're walking on the road to this town called Emmaus. Just walking, going to Emmaus. And Jesus walks up alongside. Oh snap, right? Jesus is actually alive. He really is alive. People are starting to get it. So we got Mary Magdalene, we got Cleopas, and his buddy so far that Jesus had appeared to. Okay, who's got verse 14?
Later, Jesus appeared to the 11 as they were eating. for their lack of faith and their stubborn refusal to believe those who had seen him after he had risen.
So now we've got Jesus appearing to the 11, it says the 11 disciples. 11 disciples. How many disciples were there? 12. Judas. Judas is our missing disciple. You want to know why he's missing in this case? You know everything? Judas was the one who turned Jesus over to the authorities and got him crucified. Judas hung himself out of shame. He felt so awful about betraying Jesus that he literally hung himself. He committed suicide. That's why he's not there. There's only 11 disciples now. So we got no more Judas. Right? Can you imagine that? The guy who you've been living with, basically your best friend, your mentor. But this is far more than that with Jesus. But your best friend, your mentor, a guy who you've been through thick and thin with, and you rat him out to the authorities, and they kill him. And it's your fault. Judas couldn't deal with that. Right? So Jesus is alive, and he appears to the 11 disciples. And they were eating. They're just chilling. They're eating. Probably pretty sad, because it would only be a couple days since Jesus had been killed. And he rebuked them for their lack of faith and their stubborn refusal to believe those who had seen him after he had risen. So Jesus is getting after them. He's rebuking them, right? He's yelling at them, basically. Man, why didn't you guys believe that I was risen? I told you it was going to happen. Everyone told you that I'm alive, and you didn't believe it. Why? Right? I can imagine, Jesus is probably angry. He called it. He's like, dude, I called this. I said this was going to happen. You ever felt like when you can do something cool, and then you turn to your friends and go, watch this, I can do this cool thing, and your friends go, and then you do it, and you're like, see, I told you. I told you. I told you I could do it. That's what Jesus is saying right now. So something to take away from that little nugget right there is that Jesus takes faith very seriously. He doesn't mess around, okay? That's one of the most important things that we got in the Christian life is faith. It's one of the most important things that the disciples had, faith. Okay? Now after he's done yelling at them, and after the disciples don't know whether to be disappointed or excited because Jesus is alive, who's got verse 15 and 16?
He said to them, go into the world and preach the good news to all creation. Whomever believes and is baptized will be saved, but whoever does not believe will be condemned.
All right. So there's your gospel message right there. Basically, Jesus is saying, go out everywhere and tell everyone what happened. Tell everyone about me. Right? Tell all the miracles that I did. Tell them about how I died